Good evening. It's a tough one, Bongiwe. The only problem is that this is the second time this very same judge is doing this. And therefore, it really is worrisome, I must say that. But, we are not an unforgiving people. I made the remark earlier somewhere else that, we have, as black people, we have even forgiven people who never asked for our apology. So, it's a difficult one. So I think that Pabasa's position will be that we're happy that we called out racism. We will continue to do so. We'll never get tired of calling out racism. And to that extent, the judge did the right thing upon reflection. And we want to thank the people, his family members, his wife, and all those people who prevailed on him to do the right thing.
I agree. My conduct was questionable and incorrect. And my wife also, who I thought, young Saba is afraid of me, told me that I should apologize to the whole of South Africa because I am worse than the attorneys who apparently steal the monies of clients in the RAF matter. She was reading a paper the other day about the fact that
The Times Live had identified their Mampara of the Week, and their Mampara of the Week is Judge Ratha Mokgouatleheng. And the reason they want to go after him is interesting. Judge Ratha Mokgouatleheng's remarks about a lazy defense attorney have sparked a backlash from overly sensitive, fragile ego South Africans.
So last week, Advocate Dali Mpofu did an interview with Uxoli of Newsroom Africa, and Uxoli happened to ask the question, it appears you have a judge who is at his wit's end because of time pressures and the length this trial has been running. How does he address matters of professional conduct? Because the lawyer himself was in the wrong. Yesterday, referring to the police officer as dumb, first of all, he was misquoting what happened in court. Secondly, he asked that question avoiding Dali Mpofu when he brought up the matter that this was a racial issue. He didn't want to have anything to do with the racial conversation, and surprise, on the very newsroom, Advocate Dali Mpofu is inside Phakathi within the newsroom studios and talking loud and clear about his position on what happened in that courtroom and the fact that the judge has apologized for his racial statements. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Was it intentional that Uxoli did not continue the conversation in person, one-on-one with Dali Mpofu? Do you think the producers of the show realized that there was a huge disconnect with the last interview, or was it just coincidental? Maybe it was not his time slot. Maybe that was not the time that Dali Mpofu was available. I don't know. But that was the first thing I noticed, that why didn't the conversation continue with whom it started with? Not that there is not that of course there is any issue with the present host who asked the questions, but just simply that why was it not a continuity? But let's continue listening on.
Again, since the judge actually made it. But just initial thoughts, you hear the apology. It was not conscious on my part. I do apologize. There's also, suppose that light moment of my wife also suggested that I come forward and apologize. Sincere, are you happy with that apology?
Well, it's not for me personally, because I'm just a spokesperson of the Pan-African Pan Association of South Africa. And that body is going to meet in the next day or two to consider its stance. But what we have said, what we can say, even before that decision is made, is that we welcome the apology, and we're happy that Pabasa came out in full flight in condemning what was really just crass racism, and that obviously was matched by the silence of the organized profession and other people, other usual. Holier than thou do-gooders who would have, lynched. If this was a Moses Kakane or one of the people that they hate, the outrage would have been deafening.
Well, I like the fact that when she asked him, are you happy with that apology? He says, it is not for me personally. And therefore, to me, this speaks volume. Anytime you see a person always speak in the realm of me, I. I've spoke about this before with you guys. If you've been following my channel for a while, you know that I always highlight the me's and the I's people. Those are the people to watch, okay? Dali Mpofu does not jump in and say, I last week already condemned the racial comments last week, and nobody else did. Whereas now we are in a position where we, as the Pan-African Bar Association of South Africa, are going to maybe possibly launch a complaint on Judge Ratha, depending on what happens when we sit as an association and then we decide what is our way forward. So you see that unison, and is not standing on his own on an island to say, yes, I'm happy with the apology, or no, I'm not happy with the apology. Absolutely love that. But then he closes off that statement to talk about the holier than thou do-gooders. Who do you think those are? And he says the silence of the organized professions. Who is he referring to? I'm trying to figure that out. Let me know in the comment section down below, because he says the outrage would have been deafening if it was one of the people that they hated. So he's referring to a specific group. Which group is that? Let me know in the comment section down below. But let's continue listening on, because there's a lot for us to break down.
But be that as it may, we are, after all, the Pan-African Bar Association of South Africa, which means one of the principles we believe in is Ubuntu. And we don't believe that somebody should be lynched at the stake. So I'm sure those will be the considerations that will be taken into account in dealing with this apology. What we are not ever going to apologize about is calling out racism wherever it comes, and from whether it's a black judge or a white judge or whatever. To make statements like that is completely unacceptable. And we'd like, maybe on a lighter note, to follow you, to thank the judge's wife and all those who prevailed on him over the weekend. I've said before that this is somebody I know for a long time. And I believe that, having gone through the experiences that we went through in this profession in the 80s, the early 90s and so on, it's even more disappointing, let me put it like that, that it could come from somebody like him, because he knows better.
Judge Mokgouatleheng did so by praising white advocates and stereotyping black advocates. Perhaps unjust and certainly inappropriate in the courtroom, but hardly an offense that has set off the grievance corps, now ready to march, burn tires, and call for his removal from the bench. Times Live, as I said, called him their Manpara of the week, printing the following in their paper. Mokgouatleheng rightly admonished Mzansi for placing his personal interests ahead of the administration of justice in the marathon trial. But the red-lobed lawman messed it all up when he resorted to racist remarks while dressing down the marathon man. Racist? Nah. Rude? Bigoted? Yes. But not racist.
But after these unfortunate utterances, you as Pabasa have then come out and said that you're willing to go to lay a complaint against him with the JSE. Did you start that process?
No, we haven't started it yet. We were in the process of doing so. And obviously that has now been interrupted by the apology. So, when Pabasa meets, it might say, well, we're not happy with the apology, we're going ahead. Or it might say that, we are happy with the apology and say whatever it says. We will communicate as shortly as possible. We're also encouraged that the leadership of the Judiciary intervened, because from what he said is that he had some words with the Deputy Judge President and the Judge President, and that those are also encouraging signs. And he also apologized to the Chief Justice, as he should. But as I say, we this is not a personal vendetta thing against a particular judge. It is a stance that we take, and we hope that other South Africans should also be very, very intolerant of racism. Because the worst thing we can do about racism is to just throw up our hands and say, well, there it goes again. We must never, ever get tired of calling it out. Whether it's gender discrimination, whether it's racial discrimination, or any form of discrimination. This country has gone through such a bitter history for us to tolerate that.
Yeah.
And I've also been accused of being a racist. I want to just talk one or two things about me as a person without being a lawyer.
Advocate Dali Mpofu put it so well by saying we must never, ever get tired of calling it out, whether it's a gender, whether it's GBV, or any form of discrimination. Don't just throw your hands up in the air and say, oh, well, he wasn't talking about me. Oh, well, he wasn't referring to me. Because remember, this is not the first time that the judge has done this. This is the second time. And the first time, he just got a slap on the wrist. There was no additional conversations from what it sounds like in the background, which is why he did this a second time. And the second time was even worse than the first time, because now he said the country is being run by black people. Don't forget that this is a time where we also have heard the President of the United States of America saying that there are very, 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 very strange things that are happening in South Africa, which is kind of like, what do you mean? No, that's not how it's going. So by engaging in conversations, by correcting the narrative, by calling out whenever there's a racial element involved. So, for example, those of us who watched the incident happen live, have been watching the trial, understand the nuances of what goes on in the court, the behind the scenes. But is it okay for us to have said, no, it was just a bad day. Mnisi was out of line as well. Mnisi had no business asking to go for the marathon, and just adding excuses. Anything that anyone did in that courtroom does not warrant. You cannot right a wrong with another wrong. What the judge did was wrong. What the judge did was racial. And then you hear him say, and then they're saying I'm racist. So he doesn't even recognize it, which means this has gone on. We don't know. Maybe in his personal spaces, there's some subliminal hints of this and that, and no one has actually sat him down and called him out. We hear him refer to his wife and say, I thought uyangisaba, right? Meaning, you know what? I don't want to talk about his personal life, his personal space, especially his wife, because she got through to him. Okay, so I'm not going to break that down. I don't know enough about the relationship to even comment on it. But for him to bring that as well to the forefront, now there's a perception that, wait, what's going on in the household? And now you've opened up your eyes. Now you've opened up public perception on their relationship. Whereas the focus here is, okay, time out, my lord. That was racial. And because of the outcry, he trended number 1 on X, okay? He trended, not the SENZO MEYIWA trial. No, Judge Ratha trended himself as an individual, trended on X. And then that is when all external individuals, associations are now coming in and saying, whoa, what is going on in that courtroom? Because they're not following it on a day-to-day basis like some of us. So I wanted to say, yes, Dali Mpofu is right. I hear you. And we'll continue. We will continue anytime that we hear anything, the slightest hint of any form of discrimination, we will continue to call it out. We will continue to highlight it. So let's continue listening on. There is more.
As we say, his apology is not directed at us. We're not so presumptuous as to think that it's directed at Pabasa because we called him out. It's directed at South Africans, and it's the decision of South Africans whether to forgive him or not. But what we must refrain from, is this thing of making excuses. And saying, whatever Advocate Mnisi did made him to do it. There's nothing that Advocate Mnisi could ever do to make someone to utter racist remarks. So let's get that straight and not make those apologies. And we should assume that Advocate Mnisi, what he did was wrong, or we should even assume that the judge was entitled to say no to his request, which he was, by the way. He was entitled to do that. But to go on and make those remarks, there's no excuse for that. So I think that must be made, that point has to be made very, very strongly.
Just before we close off, because unfortunately we're out of time, but there does need to be a conversation around how we talk about race in our country. Last week after the comments, I specifically remember yourself, Advocate, on this very platform speaking about we do have an issue that needs to be addressed, that is the self-hatred of black professionals and how they view themselves. And even Stanley saying some black lawyers. But misconduct happens surely across all races.
Exactly. I mean, how can you say he should have said some black lawyers? Why did he have to talk about black lawyers? He had Charles Mnisi in front of him. He has an array of black advocates in front of him, about 6 or 7 in that trial. If one he thinks has misbehaved rightly or wrongly, why does he have to paint everyone with the same brush? So there's really no excuse for that. But, as I say, we're not here to rehash and publicly lynch him again. The man has apologized. We must now deal with that apology. That apology couldn't have come too early. It should not have happened, particularly because this is happening for the second time. If you remember that he made these kinds of remark and he apologized, he's making it and he's apologizing it again. Is he going to make it for the third time? Well, You know, so it looks like a much deeper problem, but that's an issue that he will have to deal with it between him and his conscience.
Okay.
Yeah, but we can't have judges or anybody for that matter who spews out racism in this country anymore.
My commentary on Naledi's interview of Advocate Dali Mpofu compared to what we heard last week with her colleagues, well done. Well done. And you know what? Dali Mpofu said last week we shouldn't talk about gender. I'm going to let that one go. I'm not even going to look in that direction. But what I'm going to say, well done. She remained neutral. She listened. She understood what was going on in the court. She understood what happened. She was not speaking from a brief and not having a full understanding of the issue at hand. So for that reason, I say she handled this interview well. And listened to what Dali Mpofu had. She did not have her own personal agenda or bias or wanting to run away from the conversation. In fact, she led it within the realms of racism. So let's move over to the next interview because, like I said, Dali Mpofu, Advocate Dali Mpofu was on a media tour. Let's hear what else happens next.
The point of the matter is that you cannot tolerate that kind of crass racism from the bench. Well, you cannot tolerate it from anywhere, for that matter, but more so from the bench of South Africa, which is a representative of our people and the custodian of the Constitution. And therefore, the judge must reflect really on what steps he must take to rehabilitate himself from this kind of what seems to be a deep-seated belief in the inferiority of black people.
What steps would you propose?
Well, that's between him and his God. I think he must just reflect on the kind of hate that is repeatedly being caused. And to the extent that the apology was directed at the people of South Africa, the people of South Africa will decide if they forgive him. But for our part, we can only say that not only he, but any other people in those positions who are harboring racist thoughts, maybe he verbalized what other people are thinking. But to the extent that he verbalized them, then it's very regrettable.
He says, though, that for him this is out of character. He says in the decades that he's practiced, he's never held this view, and does even admit that they would have been, these remarks would have been very hurtful towards his late son as well. And I know that you, as an organization, had called on the Judge President to speak to him. He did say that the Judge President and the Deputy Judge President spoke to him. But then you were also speaking about the JSC looking at this particular matter. Are you satisfied with the fact that he's spoken to the Judge President and the Deputy Judge President, or are you still looking at the Judicial Service Conduct Commission, route here, or does it end?
Well, we will have the apology only came today. I think before the end of the week, we will reflect on that and take a position. But as I say, to the extent that he was counseled by his fellow judges and the leadership, we obviously are pleased about that. And but we're saying that he should do more than that, if possible, to reflect on his own conduct. And let me say this, Bongiwe. I know Judge Ratha Mokgouatleheng personally. When I was an attorney, he was one of our senior attorneys that we looked up to. So I know him at a personal level, and I could say that I never thought he had this side to his character. So to the extent that he regrets it, we hope that it's a lesson. It's not personal. It's not about him. It's not about how we feel personal about him. We will call out racism whenever it shows its ugly head in South Africa. And it must be called out for what it is, and all racists lurking out there behind any veil must know that we will not tire.
I'm going to stay with your personal, knowledge of him. In all the time you've known him, is he a man that's known to have said things like this?
Absolutely not. As I say, he comes from the stock of attorneys that was just before us, who really bore the brunt of racism from magistrates and from judges, from apartheid courts. So it's very disappointing from that perspective. At some stage, he was an activist even in the legal circles. So we just don't know what got into him. The problem is that we are so damaged ourselves that we start to internalize our own oppression and have self-hate, and we need to unlearn the kind of racial abuse that has been meted out to black people. So this is a much deeper problem. There are people much more qualified than me who have diagnosed, if you like, the kind of deep-seated racism that gets embedded in the victims of racism.
And one wonders then, in light of all of this, because he is saying that the lawyers of the accused are free to even bring an application for his recusal if need be. So does the association that you belong to think that he's still fit to continue?
Well, that's a very difficult question which cannot be answered in the abstract. The issue of recusal is a particular type of procedure which is based on the interest of the litigant, not even the victims of whatever racism or anything else. But the litigant, if the litigant feels that they will not get justice from a particular judge, then an application will be made. And I'm confident that Judge Mokgouatleheng, as he indicated, would entertain such an application on its own merits, so one cannot preempt it. Let me just say this from my own experience. It happens that sometimes a judge does something which you, as a lawyer, you just tell the client, judges do this and so on. But if the client insists that, well, you might understand it as a lawyer, but I don't accept it, then you are compelled professionally to make the recusal application, having made having given the advice. So lawyers are more resilient in a way, because we've been abused and insulted and all sorts of things by judges and all sorts of people who might want to abuse the power and their office. But the test is not the lawyer's feelings or ill feelings or whatever. It's the client, it's the litigant. Yeah.
How common is it? Because you say that you've been abused, but how common is such a picture in a court of law? I know this is playing out in full view of the public, but other cases wouldn't be.
Yeah, well, this kind of abuse is not common, I must say. It used to be common. I mean, when I practiced in the 80s and the 90s, if I told you some of the stories, you would think I'm making it up.
When you look at the profession itself, there are very many issues, especially of transformation, that are still spoken about. And one wonders if there is going to be such an utterance that is made, what kind of consequences does it have, particularly on the issues of transformation within the judiciary?
Very, very important question that, Bongu. I'm a big believer. When I sat in the JSC, this is something I said day in, day out, that transformation is not just about pigmentation or gender, or, you can have somebody who has internalized gender discrimination as a woman. You can have a person who has internalized racism who's black. And so transformation at that level, yes, it's important, the demographic thing, but it has to go deeper, and people have to be educated continuously to unlearn some of the stereotypes that have been created in South Africa. And maybe this, if there's a positive side to this, I can't see it much, but if there is, maybe it brings that debate up. Very important. What do we really mean by transformation? Is it just being counting 20 black, 5 women, and so on? Or is it a much more internal transformation in the true sense of seeing the world through the prism of the Constitution? And I think we're very far from that.
He was born in 1968. He died because of lymphatic cancer. I think he would also have been disappointed at my conduct. That's why I say I heartily and unreservedly, with no qualification, apologize to my colleagues here, to the accused. They say I mustn't call you the accused. They are correct. The gentleman in front of me.
I can't help but point this out. Maybe it's purely coincidental. Maybe it's not something to be polarized about, but it's staring at me in the face, and I would like to open up a conversation about it. Is it pure coincidence that both interviews that Advocate Dali Mpofu conducted today on a Monday, were with women who listened to him, who engaged in the conversation, didn't have any bias. It didn't matter which media house they were from. One was Ubongiwe from SABC and one was Unaleti from Newsroom. Both women, I believe, carried the conversation well. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a woman as well as and I'm not a feminist. However, this is something that is standing out to me. Something that is standing out to me, that the interviews today were conducted better than the ones last week. Or is it because today it was in conversation of there was an apology, let's talk about the big ugly elephant in the room, which is racism, whereas last week it was two male journalists who decided, no, Advocate Mnisi is wrong. Wrong. They made that, what is the word? Where are my words? They made that conscious bias. That was conscious bias. They were told that there was drama in the SENZO MEYIWA trial. You've got, like, they probably were given a brief, okay? They were given a brief, I think ill-informed brief, and they ran with it only to find themselves with mud on their faces, okay? Because the members of the public jury, we watched the SENZO MEYIWA trial. We're inside Phakathi within. We hear things that happen in that courtroom, okay? So you cannot just come out here and say Umnisi said a policeman was dumb. He never said that. That is not what he said. And I think they need to correct that statement, that narrative. But I think today's interviews went on way better. Way better. But as Advocate Dali Mpofu said, if there's going to be a third time where the judge apologizes, then what? So there definitely have to be some kind of consequences that he faces. Just giving out an apology, is that enough? Is that enough to change his behavior? There's definitely some unlearning behavior involved. As you know, the judge was shocked to find out that people are referring to him as a racist. And he reminds everyone that, hey, my grandmother is German. It's impossible for you guys to call me that. And then one other thing that Dali Mpofu says, which I agree with, is that people have to be educated to unlearn some of the stereotypes that have been created in South Africa. Let's continue the conversation in the comment section down below. I conducted a poll. This is definitely a topic that hit a lot of people. I conducted a poll over there on my, I almost said my Facebook, but no, it was right here on the Red app. So make sure you go ahead and follow me as well on Facebook. We're also growing over there, okay? But the poll I posted on YouTube, it says, do you accept Judge Ratha's apology that his wife made him give? And guess what? Almost 1,000 people have voted on that poll. 1,000. That is huge. 5% said yes, it was sincere and the best that we can get. 60% said no, he forgot the most important person to apologize to, and that is Umnisi. 25% said no, he said what he said, he doesn't care, call me Uncle Tom. And guess what, guys, I'm also reading the Uncle Tom book now. Actually, I'm listening to it on Audible. It's a tough book to get through, but we're going to do it. If Nisi can get through a marathon and get through 60,000 pages, I think I can commit to reading Uncle Tom, the book. And then finally, 10% said, it's too soon to decide. Actions speak louder. I guess this is where Dali Mpofu was implying that what happens the third time? Is there going to be a third time? So I guess we are all on alert, watching out. There's definitely a police brigade that is going to be watching as the other... Is it Colonel Chris White says, the grievance court are now ready to march and burn tires. So we're still gonna, I didn't hear anyone talk about marching or burning tires. I just know that people were infuriated by such utterances in court. Thank you so much for watching. I'm going to end this video right here. I don't want to make it too long, so let me just end it. You already know the house out, exit, outro, whatever it's called. Bye. Thanks for watching.